drumming and repetition.
I have multiple voices together.
So kind of a harmony kind of thing.
I think patterns.
All right. Well, the one thing, when I think of the word rhythm, and I'm a big fan of hip-hop music, so, yeah, it's an admitted obsession of mine, I guess you could say. But when I think of rhythm, I think of hip-hop music, and one of the songs that came to my mind was, it's old, but the Sugar Hill Gang Rapper's Delight, and it's widely credited as one of the first hip-hop or rap songs, and I struggled trying to find something I could bring into class, because we all know hip-hop music isn't necessarily, classroom safe. So this was a song that I thought I could bring into the class to show some rhythm, and we'll tie that back into poetry here in a minute. But I just wanted to let you guys listen to this and just see if you can kind of feel the rhythm with this song.
The Sugar Hill Gang. You don't stop. Now what you hear is not a test. I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the crew, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see, I am white now, and I like to say hello. I'm to the black, to the white, the red, and the brown, and the purple, and yellow. But first, I gotta bang, bang, the boogie to the boogie, say up, jump the boogie to the bang, bang, boogie, let's rock. You don't stop, rock the rhythm, and I'll make your body rock. Well, so far you've heard my voice, but I brought two friends along. And next on the mic is my man Hank. Come on and sing that song. Check it out. When I'm built the deal, the W deal, the women fight for my dear life. But I'm the grand master with the 3 MCs that shot the house for the young ladies. And when they come inside, and to the front, and to the freak bank, and to the bump, and when the sucker MCs try to prove a point, to try to steal. And with the serious going from song to song and from day to day, I sit down and write a brand new rhyme. I'm gonna say that miracles never cease. I'm creating a devastating masterpiece. I'm gonna rock the mic, play it and resist. Everybody, I say a thing like this when I was coming over there one dark afternoon. Reporter stopped me for an interview. She said she serves clothes and she serves Facebook and a picture of the mic and the tip.
That's plenty of that. But all right, one of the things that I've always been able to, or always struggled with, was I've always been able to identify with rhythm in music. That's never really been a struggle with me. The music and the lyrics kind of flow together to kind of establish that rhythm. But when I was in high school, and even now today sometimes, I struggle finding rhythm in writing or in poetry. And I can remember being in high school, my teacher asking me to find the rhythm in a poem, or what helps establish the rhythm in this poem, and I could think to myself, these are just words on paper. How can there be rhythm to just words on paper? So today we're going to look into that a little bit. A couple things when we look at rhythm in poetry. One of the things that can establish rhythm in poetry is the length of the line. If you have repetition in the number or the length of the lines, one after the other being about the same length, then that can form some type of rhythm. Another thing that can establish rhythm in poetry is the breaks in the poetry, the stanzas. If it's broken up well, then that can kind of set almost a different type of rhythm for each stanza if the author chooses to do so. Excuse me. Another thing that the author can use to create rhythm in poetry is punctuation. And we can do that not only in poetry but in any type of our writing. If we want our writing to flow better, plenty of people go back and add punctuation or take stuff out, and that's all just part of revision, and that just helps everything flow together better. But what I want to talk about today is iambic pentameter, and this is something that I didn't really get a full grasp on until here recently. But iambic pentameter, okay, first of all, before we dive into it, there's a couple things that you have to know about it, and that is iambic pentameter is just repetition of a pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables to create rhythm. So iambic pentameter, all right, a little quick math lesson. Everyone knows what a pentagon is, right? How many sides does a pentagon have? 5, right? So, iambic pentameter has 5 feet per line. All right, a foot is considered when you have an unstressed and then a stressed syllable followed it. That's considered a foot. So there are 5 feet per line. So the repetition of this makes for rhythm in your poetry. Alright, well, I found this poem online I want us all to take a look at. Sorry I made it out so big. I couldn't quite figure out how to shrink it all down and just fit on one page because it was so skinny. Oh, did not. Yes. Did you get the second? All right, there we go. All right, we're good. All right, so this is the poem I found online, and I just want to walk you through what I mean by feet first. Let's just take a look at the first line. Do you reflect an image on the wall? So let's go through, and if you would, just mark the syllables. Not the words, just each syllable for that line, if you would, real quick.
How do you want us to mark them?
Good point. All right, if you think it's stress, like I told you, it would be unstressed and then stressed for a foot. So mark the unstressed syllable with a U shape over the top of it, and the stress just with a diagonal line over the top of it. Let's take a look at this first line real quick. If you look at what you marked, you should have do, read, the first part of reflect, and the age, the second part of image, the as your unstressed syllables, and all the others should be stressed. So if you read it kind of the way you marked it up, and obviously you wouldn't read it like this, you're going to read it, just in your regular going about, but if you read it the way that you have it marked out as unstressed and stressed, it will go, do you reflect an image on the wall? Do you see the way that kind of, there's a beat to it? That beat is what we're talking about as far as establishing rhythm in the poem. And if you read down throughout the poem, that is present throughout pretty much the entire poem. Now, having said that, if you're writing with iambic pentameter, there will be certain times where you're not going to be able to fit, just 10 syllables on a line, whether it be just because of your word choice or, the way things are going for you in the poem. Just certain times, just 10 syllables aren't going to fit and aren't going to flow well with your poem. And with that being said, you don't have to change up your whole meaning of the poem just because, just because you're trying to fit 10 lines or 10 syllables on a line. So what I want you to do is go through and see if you can find a line in the poem that doesn't fit, and see if we can determine why that is that they don't have the 10 syllables there, or whatever, if there's not back to back, following the unstressed to stressed syllables.
the oral line?
Yes, that is the one I have marked as well.
Because another,
Right, and not only that, but there are 12 syllables on the line, so that kind of, that messes things up as far as contaminant. Now, it still follows somewhat the unstressed, stressed,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But the fact that there aren't 10 syllables makes it, it's no longer iambic pentameter. That's like adding another side to the pentagon we talked about at the beginning. It's no longer a pentagon, now it's a hexagon, so, So, just in your daybook real quick, I would like for you to now write how you think rhythm applies to poetry and how you as a writer can obtain rhythm in your poetry. Okay, does anyone care to share before we finish up?
I think I just kind of noticed that, as far as like common elements between the two, like the repetition definitely, but also the common goal being pleasure, because everyone enjoys music, and so after looking at it, actually going through the beats and the poem, it kind of makes sense how some people are drawn to poetry, not necessarily for the content, but just for the way it sounds.
And that's one thing, when I first tried to start writing poetry, and I'm still by no means good or great, or, I enjoy doing it, but when I first started trying to do it, I found myself trying to rhyme so much and this and that and the other, but for me, this following a stressed, unstressed kind of thing is easier for me than trying to constantly end with that next rhyming word. So it's just something to think about the next time you try to write, if you do decide to write a poem, and hopefully you can understand a little bit more of how rhythm is achieved in poetry.